think we're doing about 6, possibly 7 church services on a Sunday in 6 or 7 different locations. So
Wow.
we would start first thing in the morning and have a service and load up in the back of the Hilux. We could fit probably about 15, 20 people in a 5-seater Hilux in the Solomon Islands because they don't have any rules, of course, about sitting
Right.
in the back, which was another great thing growing up. You sit in the back tray and stand up holding on, looking out over the roof of the car as you drive down the highway. It was tons of fun to a 7-year-old.
Yeah.
But yeah, we would just pack up, drive to the next church and have church, then pack up, drive to the next church, have church, and off we would go. We'd stop somewhere for lunch and then just keep going, get home early evening. So Sundays were quite tiring, I think, for my parents. For me, it was just a big adventure.
Welcome to the Hacka Podcast. My name is Greg Hackathorn. I hope you all are doing well. I delayed in getting this one out to you guys because we were celebrating my wife's birthday this past weekend. And also we had a public holiday in New South Wales on Monday. I'm not sure if it's because the whole state was celebrating my wife, but we had that day off and it's normally my editing day. And I decided that I would, instead of dividing my attention between the podcast and the family, I'd spend the day with the family and then get this out to you guys a day late. So sorry about that, but I'll look to getting it out to you on Tuesdays moving forward. Today we are joined by Jason Gration. He is the pastor of HopeDivine Pentecostal Church in the beautiful city of Cairns, which is in North Queensland, right up there near the Great Barrier Reef. He is the son of brother and sister Gration. They are missionaries to Vanuatu, but they in the past served as missionaries to Solomon Islands and Papua New Guinea, and they went to Solomon Islands when Jason was just a boy. Jason, along with his wife, were aimers to Vanuatu as well before answering the call to pastor in Cairns. This is an interesting conversation about life on the mission field, as well as learning to answer the call of God for yourself. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Well, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining me tonight.
Hey, my pleasure. I'm actually quite excited to be on here. I feel kind of special. So thanks for having me.
I'm not sure what we call this. It's not a hackasation, or what was that you came up with?
Yeah, hackasation, I think, or I can't remember now.
Well, it's so good to have you on the podcast. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to have this conversation with you. Normally, with these conversations, we like to start off with giving a bit of background about yourself, just so the listeners get a bit of an idea of where you're coming from and the sort of worldview that you bring to the table. And also, your background is especially interesting, being a missionary kid, for those who don't know you. And so we'd like to dig into that a little bit tonight, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, sure thing. You're right. I was a missionary kid, and it's always an interesting upbringing. I was only about 7 when my parents went to the Solomon Islands,
Mm.
and growing up in another culture is very different. I actually think it's quite a privilege because you get a different perspective and outlook on life. But that's not to say it doesn't have its challenges.
Right.
Um, so I remember being only, like I said, 7 years old, and we landed in the Solomon Islands. Brother Jacobson was with us. We went to the hotel room. Don't think the water was working or something like that. We'd gotten off the plane. The whole country, it's for someone who doesn't travel. You realize after you start traveling that different countries have different smells.
Right.
They just smell different,
Yeah, it's
and the
true.
whole country smells very different, and I remember just sitting on the bed and just crying myself to sleep that night, just culture shocked out of my mind. I think we all were.
Yeah, fair enough.
But yeah, it was interesting. It was good. It was really good.
I remember you're 100% correct, and I moved to a westernized country, not like the Solomon Islands.
Yeah.
And was that in the 90s as well, right? It would have been 90s.
1993. I think it was in March we went.
Wow.
So this was before FaceTime before really
Mm.
even internet. I think we ended up getting dial-up internet at one stage, but we relied on letters and parcels from the post office. The trip to the post office was always the highlight.
Oh wow.
Because you always see who had sent you a letter or who had sent you a parcel or something. Especially as kids, you wanted parcels. Parcels were good because people back in Australia would think of those poor missionary kids suffering over there with nothing there, nothing at all, and so they
Right.
would send you chocolates and lollies and toys and all sorts of stuff,
Yeah.
which was great. We liked supporters like that.
Exactly. I was just saying, like, whenever I moved to Australia at I think it was 19 years old, 2000, end of 2008 into 2009, so internet age, social media is
Mm,
already here and all of that. The world's connected. But I remember getting off the plane and just we were driving down the highway and just looking out my window, and everything's different. Obviously,
mm,
different vegetation, the roads look
mm.
different. Never mind that it's on the opposite side of the road to America, where I come from. But everything is different. But I was still within a Western culture, and everyone still spoke English and all of that. So I can't imagine what it would have been like at the age of 7,
Mm.
moving to the Solomon Islands. Now, just for our listeners, where exactly are the Solomon Islands?
So the Solomon Islands is off the east coast of Australia. I think if you start in the current city that I'm in now, Cairns, and just draw a straight line straight east, you pretty much come to the Solomon Islands. I think it was only like about a 2 hour flight
Oh
from
wow.
Cairns back in the day. There's not a direct flight from Cairns anymore, but it wasn't all that far away.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's just in the Pacific Islands, Pacific Ocean rather.
Right.
So yeah,
And do you remember it being, obviously you're a bit younger, but do you remember it being isolated, or did you guys have many Westerners visiting the islands while you were there?
we did get some visitors through, mostly either from the states or from Australia visiting us. Brother Jacobson would come through from time to time. But yeah, I think it was fairly isolated. There was other missionary families from other organisations there as well. But yeah, no, it was quite isolated. But I don't really remember that so much as a
Hmm.
kid.
Obviously, yeah.
For me, once I got over that initial culture shock period, for me it was, just a great adventure. This was
Hmm.
exciting. This was fun. No other kid ever got to do this, as far as I knew.
Right.
Growing up in another country and learning a different language and playing with the kids in the village and climbing coconut trees and all this kind of stuff is stuff that we would never do back
Hmm.
home in Australia.
What
So I don't really remember so much it really being isolated. I just remember lots of good memories and fun times and things like that. So
what language do they speak over there?
in the Solomons, they speak it's like a pidgin English kind of thing. So it's easy enough to understand if they speak slowly. You can
Hmm.
kind of work out what they're saying, but of course, often they don't speak slowly. They're speaking quite fast. So we picked that up fairly quickly, and mum and dad were obviously trying to learn it too. I was out playing with kids in the villages quite a lot, so I would come back with words that they hadn't heard, and we would try and talk it in the house just to learn it, which actually had rather funny consequence. My brother, who was only 2 when we went over there, really learned to speak the pidgin English before he even learned to speak English.
Oh
Um,
wow.
so Nate's technically second language is English, although we soon realised in the house, hey, we better speak English at home, or Nate's going to go back to Australia one day and he's not going to know English.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, it was rather funny.
For
So
for schooling over there, did you guys do homeschool, or did you go to school?
no, we did homeschooling. Some of your listeners may be familiar with ACE. So Accelerated Christian Education, I think it is. It's the PACE system.
Hmm.
So we did homeschooling. I did go to a school there that was an ACE school where you went every day and you sat down and did your paces under supervision and you had lunch breaks and you could play with other kids and things like that. I'm pretty sure I was the only white guy there. I think
Oh wow.
everyone else was Islanders there. So that was good. But yeah, mostly just homeschooling. And usually I was pretty self-motivated enough to get the work done, and I soon realized if I did it really quickly, I could spend the rest of the day playing. So I learned if I get up at like 6 a.m., I could get, a couple hours work done before breakfast. So
Yeah, that's a motivator for sure.
absolutely.
So, what was the church like when you guys got over there? I know we're kind of digging into your memory a bit because you were only seven,
Okay.
but as you were, I guess, growing up, you would have been more aware of the size of the church and what was going on. So, what was the
Yeah.
church culture like when you guys moved to Solomons?
When we got there, from memory, there was one church. It was quite small, but there were a couple of real key leaders. The church was at a place called Kopito, and there was a couple of key leaders in the church, and I think the church had about um, 30, 40 people in it or something like that. So
Mm,
it wasn't a big church, and I think that was the other thing that was interesting coming from Australia. It was a church with hard wooden pews, no windows. Like they had holes in the wall where the windows were meant to be from memory, but no actual windows. They had
wow.
a accordion. Is an accordion the one that you play
Yep.
like that? I
Yep.
think that's an
That's right. Yeah.
accordion. So they had an accordion and a keyboard and a guitar, which was a real interesting mix for me. I don't think I'd ever seen an accordion played in a church service before. So that was good. But we did a lot of work on the Sundays, and there was a lot of preaching points, particularly on the main island of Guadalcanal. I think on Sundays, by the time we left that island to move to another island after about 2 years, I think we're doing about six, or possibly seven church services on a Sunday in six or seven different locations. So
Wow.
we would start first thing in the morning and have a service and load up in the back of the Hilux. We could fit probably about 15, 20 people in a five-seater Hilux in the Solomon Islands, because they don't have any rules, of course, about sitting
Right.
in the back, which was another great thing growing up. You sit in the back tray and stand up holding on, looking out over the roof of the car as you drive down the highway. It was tons of fun to a 7-year-old.
Yeah.
But yeah, we would just pack up, drive to the next church and have church, then pack up, drive to the next church, have church, and off we would go. We'd stop somewhere for lunch and then just keep going, get home early evening. So Sundays were quite tiring, I think, for my parents. For me, it was just a big adventure. Um, but yeah, it was good. It was good. But yeah.
Seeing a whole bunch of different people, but yeah, that's incredible. Six services a Sunday, and
Mm, mm.
many pastors in the West find it difficult to do two services on a Sunday.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
I
Um,
think early last year, when we had the restrictions in Sydney, I think we were only allowed 50 per service. That was
mm,
max you were allowed in your building, no matter how big or small the building was. Your maximum you're allowed was 50, and so we normally have two services at our church in Sydney, and we did four services, one on a Saturday, three on a Sunday, and we were depleted by the end of that.
mhm,
Every weekend for maybe a month it was. So I couldn't
mm.
imagine six on the same day, and not in the same building. You're traveling and doing all this. That's incredible.
Yeah. It was pretty amazing, and a lot of times you'd be into the bush to get to these places where the churches were. You were off road, 4-wheel driving over rivers, all sorts of things. It wasn't just to jump in the sealed road and drive 20K down the road. It was yeah, going bush
Mm.
to get to these churches and to preach. And there's a photo of my dad preaching at one of these churches. He's got it still. While he's preaching, there's a big python going across the back of the church
No
while he's
way.
preaching. The mum sort of just lifts the camera up and takes a photo while he's preaching. He just kept on preaching. Developed it afterwards and showed him. He's like, "Ooh, glad I didn't see that there."
Take that and share it at the next general conference.
Yeah, that's it. So yeah, that was interesting.
Oh man.
But yeah, it was an adventure. So
So you were there to how old? How old were you when you all left the Solomons?
so I was 7 when we went there. We stayed there for 5 years. So I would have been 12 or 13, I think, when we came home. When we came back to Cairns back then. So
What was it like coming back to Australia after that? Obviously, you guys would have you would have visited a few times in between, correct? For like conference or
Yeah, we visited a few times. I think we came back once for holidays, maybe twice, and maybe for a conference or two. I do remember when we would come back on those visits, it was, we would walk into a shopping mall and we would just be spaced out, so much white, so clean, so polished. It would just play with our minds.
mm,
Nate, Nate especially, he freaked out when we came back to Australia because he was two when we went over there, so he had no real concept of what a mall was like. It was just
right.
completely foreign to him. When we came back, I think one of my struggles was getting back into Australian schooling system. That was difficult. By the time I'd done 5 years of homeschooling, I was quite a ways ahead on my studies compared to other kids of my age. So when I
Right.
came back, they wanted to put me back into the eighth grade, I think, whereas I was already kind of studying a little bit of 10th grade stuff. So it was rough getting back into that and rough getting back into interacting with people. And I think coming off the mission field where basically church is your life,
Mm,
the work is your life, what you're doing for the Lord as a family is your life. Everything revolves around that. Coming back to Australia and having other kids who are concerned with things that are not church was just, why in the world wouldn't you go to a church on a Sunday? That's
yeah.
just
Be
crazy,
hard to
right?
understand, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And coming back from that, just adjusting to that was difficult, I think, as well. So yeah,
Yeah.
it was interesting.
I could imagine, especially Nate. Being 2 years old, come back at 7, and
Mm,
that's all he's really known.
yeah, yeah. I'm not sure what it was like for him, but for me, I got into high school and um, just tried to fit in as best I could. tried
He,
to tried to learn what it was like to be a teenager in Australia. So
mm. So your parents also, from my knowledge and understanding, they also spent time serving in Papua New Guinea, as well as they're now serving in Vanuatu as missionaries. That's correct.
yeah, that's right. So when we left the Solomon Islands, we came back to Cairns, and Dad pastored in Cairns for about 5 years, and then they
Okay.
went to New Guinea, and they were in New Guinea for I think 9 or maybe 12 years. I'm not 100% sure. And then they were in Vanuatu, and now they've been in Vanuatu for another 10 years, nearly, I think. So,
Wow.
so they've been doing it for a while now. But yeah, both Solomon's, New Guinea, and Vanuatu as well. So,
Did you?
so they've been around.
Yeah. Did you go to Papua New Guinea at all? Did you spend time there?
I did, yeah. I went up there when I was 19. I'd finished 19 or 18, around that time. I'd finished high school and I was a bit aimless, I think it was probably fair to say.
Mm.
So I ended up going up to New Guinea for 12 months, lived with mum and dad up in Goroka for a while there. I helped out a little bit with the work that I don't know, it was an interesting time. I think I was just trying to work out what I wanted to do with my life and where I wanted to go really at that time. So it was good just to be up there and be able to be with mum and dad and helped out with various things and I preached a youth camp in Port Moresby when I was up there, and
Okay.
that was
Yeah.
my first real opportunity to preach in front of a crowd of people. Dad was great. The district presbyter rang him up and said, "Hey, we would like to get Jason down to come preach our youth conference. Do you think he'd want to do that?" Dad just said, "Yeah, absolutely, he'll do that." So they hung up and he turned to me and he said, "Hey, guess what? You're preaching in Port Moresby." I said,
Oh
"Okay,
man.
that's great." It wasn't too bad because the first thing I said, I said, "Well, look, how many times am I going to have to preach? Do you know?" And he said, "Oh, they said you'll only have to preach 2 times, maybe three, but probably just 2 times."
Right.
So I get down there, and the first night they stand up and they're like, "Oh, we're so honored to have our main speaker here." I'm just like, ground open up, swallow me quickly. And then they come and see me and they say, "Oh, by the way, like the other speakers aren't coming, so it's all you. You're going to
Oh
have to preach,
man.
I think, 5 times." And I thought, oh Lord, I've only got like 3 sermons prepared that took me like 4 months to get ready. My first service I preached for, you know, 30 minutes or something, which is what I'd aim for. My second service was 25 minutes.
Oh
Third
no.
service was like 20 minutes. And I'm running out of material. I get up there, and the last 2 messages I preached for like 10 minutes. That all I can
Oh.
manage. But it was good. It was a good experience.
Oh man. Had you been preaching much before
No,
you
not a
got that?
whole lot. Not a whole lot at all. It was really that was really where I started to preach, I think. Was that there. And then I came back and started to preach a bit more back here in Australia. But that was the first time I'd really ever had to preach, other than, just giving a word or a testimony or something like that. And yeah, it was in front of like 200, 300 young people who are all like my age as
Oh
well, mind
man.
you.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
So
you were young. You were what, like
yeah, yeah, I'm like
19?
I'm like I was either 18 or 19, so I
Oh
wasn't like a seasoned veteran. But yeah, getting chucked off the deep end, it worked, I guess.
yeah, I could not imagine that. My goodness. That's a baptism
Yeah.
by fire right there.
Oh yeah. 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 It was interesting.
I would
Very
uh,
interesting.
I was privileged to go to Papua New Guinea a few years back with my pastor. He was invited to preach at a general conference there. And I was just
Hmm.
traveling, I just wanted to go to Papua New Guinea. And I'd heard so many amazing stories about the place from people like your parents, from, I think it was Brother Cole, Billy Cole had shared a lot about
Yeah.
his times in Papua New Guinea. And so I'd heard this since I was a kid in the US. And I'm like, oh, I jumped at the opportunity to go thinking I'm just carrying a Bible, carrying the preacher's jacket, accompany my pastor. And get there, and they found out that I was a minister as well, and they slotted me in for one of the main sessions at their general conference.
Absolutely.
Oh my goodness! I get up there to preach, and I'm looking out there, and I see a couple thousand faces, and I'm just like, oh my, it's
You have to preach with
unbelievable.
the translator.
We preach with the translator, but I mean they're so passionate there.
Yeah.
You really don't have to. You don't have to be a biblical scholar to share
Mm,
a good word that's going to bless
mm,
them. And
mm.
man, can they worship in
Oh
Papua New
yeah.
Guinea? Unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah.
My phone was filled with videos of just watching them passionately worship. Is really cool. I was so blessed to be up there.
Yeah. It's a pretty amazing place.
So you spent? Did you say you spent about a year there in Papua New
Yeah.
Guinea?
I was up in New Guinea for about a year. So,
Okay. And have
um,
you spent time in Vanuatu outside of visiting?
yeah. So, fast forward a few years, and I was married by that stage to Janie, and we ended up going on AIM over to Vanuatu for
Oh
12
wow.
months. So,
So that's the
um,
UPCI AIM
yeah, we were
program?
under the UPCI program under
Mm.
AIM. So I had to send off my monthly report to, I think it was Brother Buckland and Brother Poitras at the time, and under the UPCI program. Yeah, so we were there for 12 months, which was another great experience for us. Real time of growth, I think, for both of
Mm.
us as well, and a step of faith too. So
Right. And that
yeah, it was
was
interesting.
so yeah. So that would have been after Brother Denny.
Yeah, no, that was after Brother Denny, because this was when was this? This was 2000 and the end of 2013 we went.
Mm.
2014 we were there. Yeah,
Okay.
it was the end of 2013 we went. We came back towards the end of 2014, early 2015.
What was it like supporting your dad over there and your mom and dad over there in Vanuatu?
It was good. They weren't there.
Oh, they weren't.
Um,
Okay.
no, they were on deputation in the States, and that was one
Okay.
of the main reasons why they needed an AIM worker to come.
Hmm.
And I think one of the good things about me being over there is that Dad and I, we're quite close. He's someone I certainly look up to, and someone who I talk to about a lot of things that are going on and get his advice on. And he always seems to have a good way of looking at things. So we know each other quite well.
Mm.
So he was comfortable knowing that I kind of know how he thinks and what he likes and how he likes things done. So it was easy for him to have me over there. But yeah, it was really good. It was really good working there and working with mum and dad, and you know, it was good because I learned that being a missionary is not just, preaching
Yes.
with crowds,
Mm.
with people flooding to the altars. There's a lot of just day-to-day stuff that missionaries do that, you kind of have to be a jack of all trades almost, I think, as a missionary.
Mm.
It was growing up, I learned, dad taught me how to change a tire on our Hilux in the Solomon Islands because, we got flat tires all the time. So that's how I learned how to change a tire, was out in a field somewhere in Wattle Canal. you know. I learned how to do some basic plumbing in Vanuatu, because
Wow.
if something went wrong, many times in countries like that, if something goes wrong, you just have to fix it. There's you just don't have the access to tradies and things like that to fix things. So
Mm.
I learned how to do plumbing. I learned how to use that blue glue stuff that they use. And, yeah, it was fun.
Awesome. So that sort of wraps up your time on the mission field, that AIM trip to Vanuatu.
Yeah, yeah. After that, we came back to Australia. We had Jonathan, and it was interesting, because we really wanted to get back to being on AIM, or at least back to the mission field, and certainly, um, mum and dad needed the help. There's so much work to be done. You could easily have 4 or 5 missionaries on each field, and still need more. There's always
Mm.
work to be done, but God just kept shutting the door.
Mm.
We tried so many different ways to get back on the mission field. While we were over on there on AIM in Vanuatu, there was a policy change at UPCI, which meant we weren't able to progress into the next stage of being missionaries.
Mm.
Um, so that door was shut, and we just couldn't get the financial support. Our personal funds had been expended already, and so we kind of sat back and waited for whatever the next direction was from God, which turned out being pastoring up here in Cairns. So, but
So,
that's a interesting thing, waiting for direction from God.
oh, yeah. Yes, it is. What do you believe is the most important thing that you learned from your time on the mission field? So obviously, this is ranging all the way from when you were a kid through to early
Oh,
teen years, and then you got your teenage stint in Papua New Guinea, and then you got your married couple AIM trip to Vanuatu. But what would you say? And it could also
most
be
important.
what your parents have also portrayed to you as
Yeah,
well.
I think having a good work ethic is definitely important as a missionary.
Mm.
That certainly got put into me as I was growing up. I remember when we were in the Solomon Islands, we were there with Brother C. I don't Have you ever met Roscoe C? He was from Texas. He's passed away now.
I don't think I did, no.
No, I met quite a few listeners in Australia would recognize the name, but he was in the Solomon Islands with us. And when I was a kid, I didn't really pay much attention, but I look back at it now, and when we're doing those 6 or 7 services, he was not well, but he would still come, and he would sit in the spare tire. So the spare tire was in the back of tray of the Hilux, and we would put pillows in that, and he would sit in that because he couldn't get himself into the cupboard, into the cab of the Hilux. And we would go to all those services, and he would get home and he would be just exhausted, so tired that one of my jobs was just pulling his boots off, because it was just easier for me to do it for him than to him to get down there and take his own boots off. So, missionary work is a lot of hard work.
Mm.
um, I think is probably one of the things I learned from it. It's very rewarding work as well, but sometimes it's just knuckle down and hard work.
Mm.
So I think that was probably one of the most important things I learned. As an adult on the mission field, I really learned not to sweat the small stuff. which I'm still learning, I think, sometimes, if I'm honest. But you know, if when you're on the mission field, if something can go wrong, there's a pretty good chance that it will.
Mm.
You know, we had a young man who will remain unnamed who was mowing our lawn, and I hear this weird sound coming from the lawnmower, and I go out there, and the bolt has sheared off the handle on this lawnmower, and the whole thing's just rattling. And I said, "Hey, bro, how are you pushing this thing?" "Oh, I don't know, just keep pushing it." So he turned the lawnmower off, and I turn it over, and the bolt or something has gotten into the blade, and the blade's cracked and about to come off. And he's just pushing along, pushing
Oh
along.
man.
It's like, come on. But you know, you just kind of can't get too uptight about all those small things. You've just got to try and just get it fixed. You know, 'cause someone's got to do it. You know.
Right. So we talked about your time on the mission field, and you touched a bit about ministering in Papua New Guinea. But I'm interested in
Mm,
finding out when did you personally, when did you feel the call to ministry? You grew up around church. You talked about how like when you were younger, you didn't know what it was like to not be, fully committed
mm,
to
mm.
church and that sort of stuff. But when did you personally feel a call to ministry?
The first, there's two specific occasions in my life. I say this very carefully because you know you don't want to just flippantly say things, but I believe in my life there's been two very, very specific times where God has spoken to me. And one of those times was after I came back from New Guinea. I was living in Perth with some people there. I was in Brother Glass's church at the time, and I had struggled to adapt to coming off the mission field to back to Perth. You know, I remember going to a youth camp. I landed from PNG, and there was a regional youth camp happening, and the Glasses picked me up, took me straight out to this youth camp, and dropped me off. And I'm with a whole bunch of young people. I don't know any of them. And as I walk in, the talk around the camp was that someone had been stabbed at this youth camp and was on their way to hospital. Yeah, they don't tell you about
Oh
those
my
stories.
goodness.
You want to know why Brother Wilmot is so concerned about safety? We had stabbings at our youth camp when I was a kid.
Oh my
So they're
goodness.
taking him to hospital. It's just a little cut. He had to get stitches. And I'm sitting here thinking, my Lord, these heathens are so carnal. It's like I'm so spiritual. I've come off the the mission field. But I think I really started to get a bad attitude during a bit of that time, and I end up really struggling. I some people know my testimony, some people don't, but I really started to struggle, and I was getting to the point of just giving up and walking away from it all.
Oh wow.
Because it just didn't feel like I don't want to say this wrong. I'm just trying to think how to put this. I looked around and I felt like people weren't taking things with God seriously, like I felt they should in all my self righteousness.
Right.
And as a result of that, that bad attitude really took root and began to grow, and I
Mm.
started to really struggle. I didn't go out and go clubbing and do drugs and all that kind of stuff. I still came to church on Sunday, but basically I was just going through the motions. I wasn't really involved. I was just there because, I didn't want to embarrass mum and dad. They're missionaries, and what would it look like if their eldest son, backslid or something like that. But that's kind of where I was, and I fell into a real dark place
Mm.
where I started, you know, thinking about different ways I could end my life and all this kind of crazy, crazy stuff. And
Wow.
I remember one night was particularly bad, and I got out of bed and I got out on my knees and I started praying. And I'm glad, I'm glad God is um, approachable
Mm.
and merciful, because I got angry with him. I said, this is ridiculous. And I poured it all out and basically said, look, if this is real, if anything I've been taught is real, then you need to show up right now and make a difference in my life, or that's it. I'm quitting. I'm not even going to bother trying to pretend anymore. I'm done. going to go live my own life. I'll do my own thing. I'll just ignore you. And bro, God showed up in such a way, just an incredible way, completely changed my life around. Those thoughts were gone. I've never struggled with that ever since. In a night, my life was turned around. And it was at that moment, really, I thought, okay, that's it. Now I know this is real. This is not real because mum and dad have told me it's real. It's not real because I've seen it happen to other people. It's real because now I've experienced this. And I was baptized. I was filled with the Holy Spirit already. But I allowed myself to really just get distant. And at that point, things really started turning around. I went to my pastor and I said, look, I want to help. Just anything, whatever you want me to do. Don't care. Just put me to work. Let me do something. Let me help. So I think I ended up teaching Sunday school. I had a group of, I was teaching
Was it junior youth?
no. It wasn't junior youth. It was the 5, 6, 7, and 8 year olds, I think.
I got
So,
started in Sydney doing junior youth. Little did I know it was the class no one wanted to teach.
so yeah, oh, that's funny. So yeah, so that was really the moment where it was like, okay, I'm definitely called to ministry, and I'm just going to serve. And
Mm,
really, that's kind of all I've ever done ever since that is just what can I do? Where can I work? Wherever you need me to be, that's where I'll be. I'll do whatever needs to be done, roll my sleeves up and get into it because now it's not about my parents, it's not
mm,
about others, it's not about tradition. This is about me and my relationship with God, and this is real to me. So I'm getting into it now. So that was really the first time where I knew that I was going to be in ministry, and I didn't know all the details. And I often think we don't know the details. I don't think God lays out everything we're going to be doing in ministry, probably because I may have freaked out. But, it was enough for me to know that God was real and he wanted me to work for him. And so I just worked wherever I could put my hand to work. Um, so, yeah. And then there was a specific time in Vanuatu where I felt God specifically call me to say, hey, I want you to pastor.
mm,
And that was in the morning before Bible college. I was teaching Bible college in Vanuatu, and so my practice was to go down to my dad's office before we would have devotion for Bible college. Before the students would arrive, I would go down there, read my Bible, I'd pray, have my quiet time down there. And it was on one of those times I was praying, kneeling on the floor, and God specifically, like, it sat me up. He specifically spoke and said, I want you to pastor for me. Again, he didn't give me any details. He didn't say you're going to do this and you're going to do that and here's where you're going to pastor and here's the revival you're going to. It'd be nice if he said that.
yeah, would have been.
But I knew I was going to pastor, and that was just so specific. It was crazy. So that was another time where I felt God specifically give me direction for what he wanted me to do.
Yeah, unfortunately, he doesn't lay it out step by step exactly what you're going to be doing. And
No.
that's where faith comes in, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, what advice would you give a young person who feels the call to ministry?
Hmm. I think there's so much I could say, but I think for me something that's been really really key in my development, something I still have today, is I have people in my life who I call and talk to. God's will always be contained in His Word, um, but it's also good to have people who have the authority to speak into your life.
Hmm.
And I'm a firm believer in actually really calling that out to somebody and saying, hey, I want you to know you have the authority. Will you be willing to take the authority in my life and call out? If you see something that I'm stepping out of line, I want you to pull me back into line, and actually really call that out. And I've always had three people who I've had in my life. I've found three just to be a good number.
Hmm.
Just and it could be a youth leader. Would be your pastor. If, you're under a pastor, you want your pastor to be one of them for sure. But your pastor, your youth leader, and I don't know, someone else maybe. Get your pastor's advice. He might have some advice as well. That, and I think, maintaining your own walk with God is so
Mm.
important. When I went through that period in Perth, I lost perspective because I wasn't focused on building my relationship with God. I'd kind of assumed because of my upbringing that it was okay.
Mm.
Once I realized it wasn't, and God showed up like He did, I realized then I actually need to work on this. I need to spend time with God.
Mm.
I need to pray. It's the common thing pastors always say, right? What
Right.
do I do if I want to draw closer? Well, you need to pray. You need
Right.
to read your Bible.
Mm.
Those Sunday school songs are true.
Yeah.
Read your Bible, pray every day. You'll grow, grow, grow.
Mm.
I think that, and then the only other thing I think I'd add is be willing to say yes. You know, um, to whatever it is. Young people often, and I was the same. We put caveats on how we want to serve God. Well, God, I'll serve you here and here, but I don't want to do that. That's either beneath me or I don't feel qualified to. One or the other.
Mm.
But I think learning to say yes. And that's the approach I took with Pastor Glass over in Perth. I went to see him and I said, "Look, you just get me to do whatever you say. I'll say yes." So they said, "Hey, can you teach Sunday school?" Yes. "Hey, can you sing as a worship singer?" Yes.
Yeah.
Sing? I'm not a singer, but sure, I'll sing.
Mm.
Can you lead worship? I've never led worship before, but yes, absolutely, I can lead worship. You know, um, so just say yes.
Yeah. I
And
agree. I agree
just,
wholeheartedly.
just say yes. Just say
Mm.
yes. I'll do it. You know.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I really like to stress with young people is make yourself available for
Mm,
whatever. You're not nothing's above you, nothing's below you. So make yourself
mm,
available if someone is trusting you with something. As long as you have a walk with God, as long as you do have a consistent prayer life, if you're asked to do something, yeah, make yourself available. Give yourself the opportunity
absolutely.
to be used by God.
Absolutely. And something else I could add to that is as a pastor, I love it when people come to me and say, "Hey, pastor, I've seen a gap here. Do you think I could jump in and fill that?"
Mm.
Oh, I love
Yeah,
people
it's
like that.
amazing.
A lot of people sit back and say, "Well, if God moves on the pastor's heart, he will ask me to do that." It just doesn't work like that. We've got a lot on our minds. Just
Yeah,
come and say if you
exactly.
see a gap, fill it. Jump in. Roll your sleeves up, get the work done. So young people, talk to your pastor. Say, "Hey, pastor, I want to help out. Where can I help out? Put me to work. You want me to sit in the door? I'll sit on the door. You want me to sweep the church? I'll sweep the church. Whatever." But don't sit back and say, "Well, God will speak to my pastor." Perhaps we hide laziness under spirituality sometimes.
Mm. It's possible.
Mm, mm,
Yeah. So you as you've mentioned a few times or alluded to, you're now pastoring a church in Cairns, and I've been privileged
mm.
to visit you guys up there a couple times. Once for AYM, and then actually my last time ever on a plane was to fly up to Cairns last year. It
Really?
was March
Wow.
last year was the last time I've been on a plane. It's crazy, but
Mm.
we were up with you guys in Cairns. How's the church going up there?
It's going good. We are in the middle of moving buildings. For those who follow us on Facebook, you'll see that HopeDivine is in the middle of moving. And so right now, our current church building is an empty shell because we were renting a shed. So we've just been uh, doing demo work, pulling down the walls and the lights out and all this kind of stuff. And we're about to start working on a new building, which we're renting again still, but it's nearly not quite double the size, but getting close to the size we've got now. So
That's
it'll be
awesome.
good. It'll give us a couple more Sunday school rooms. It'll give us a bigger auditorium. It'll give us a little foyer area. So it's going to be good. So yeah, but it's going good. COVID's been interesting. You're learning how to live stream and things like that, and all that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, no, it's going well. It's going well.
That's amazing to hear that you guys are growing and getting into a bigger facility, especially, I mean, I'm not sure how many of the listeners would be aware. Obviously, not all listeners are from Australia, but you guys are in Cairns, and you guys have been hit quite hard by the COVID restrictions that Australia has put on. Obviously, your city itself hasn't had as strict of lockdowns per se, but
Mm.
because Kansas relies a lot on tourism,
Yeah, that's
that
right.
really hasn't been happening for you guys.
No, it hasn't. And domestic tourism, thankfully, has picked up quite a bit because, if you can't go to a tropical location overseas, you might as well go to a tropical location in Australia.
Right.
But with all the lockdowns we've got happening down south now, we're seeing a lot of cancellations across the hospitality and tourism industry, which has been interesting for us. So yeah, there's a bit of pain up here at the
Mm.
moment. So
Yeah, we've been
mm,
wanting to get up there, but it's just we've had one trip, a family holiday since COVID, and we went to the Gold Coast, but we actually, funnily enough, stayed in New South Wales in Tweed Heads. We made sure to book our hotel in Tweed Heads just in case the border shut down. We could still go somewhere around there and still have a holiday. We would just
yeah,
miss out
yeah.
on going into the Gold Coast. That's how crazy it's been. It's always up in the air. One week is completely fine in a couple cases, and there you go.
Mm.
But
Happens quickly, doesn't it?
it does. So, do you believe that? And I think I know the answer to this, but do you believe that life on the mission field prepared you for pastoring for your role that you have now?
Bro, nothing prepares you for pastoring. No, no, no. I'm joking, of course. Although, I do remember the glossy brochure that the executive board gave me when they asked me to pastor, and it doesn't match what's happened. So, no, I think it has. If anything, it's taught me that it's just hard work. You
Mm,
just pastoring is often not glamorous. Everyone looks at pastors and all they really ever see is the pulpit ministry. They don't see the hard work that happens in the background, the meeting with this person or filling out this government form or taking care of this or making sure your insurance is up to date and all that kind of stuff, particularly for the smaller churches where you don't have people who handle all that kind of stuff. So I think being on the mission field where you kind of just learn that, hey, I've got to just take care of all these little bits and pieces, catch all the loose, fill all the loose gaps that are there. I think that's kind of helped me prepare a lot for pastoring. So
mm. You mentioned
mm.
earlier that your parents pastored in Kansas as well. Is it the same church that you ended up taking
in
over?
a
Or?
manner of speaking, yeah, it is. Yeah, yeah. There's a bit of a story behind all of that, but yeah, it is the same church. So
Okay.
there's been a church in Cairns for at least 30 years,
Mm,
possibly even more than that. Brother Jacobson started the church up here from Townsville.
mm,
Um, so yeah, it was the same church, and there is one elder in my church, him and his wife, who remember when I was in Cairns as a teenager, and so it's good to look back and see them in the church, and they remember my parents very fondly, and having them in church has always been good. It's just a blessing to see them still living for God. You know,
yeah, that's awesome.
so yeah, a lot of continuity there. So.
Mm. I like to ask this question to everyone who comes on the podcast as a guest. What drives
Mm.
you when it comes to ministry?
Um, I'm not sure if anyone else has said this, but for me, it is seeing people's lives changed.
Mm,
You know, that's what gets me out every day. It's what wakes me up in the morning, and I'm bivocational, so I work a full time job as well. And there's always this understanding that you have a higher obligation than just the company, And every time I have a meeting with someone, every time I meet with people, it's always there watching for an opportunity because you just never know when you get to have a conversation with someone about the Lord. But it's when you've been working with someone and you've been teaching them Bible studies and mentoring them and I remember there was a lady who still living for God. She's in another UPC, a church now. She's moved away for work. But, I witnessed to her for nearly 3 years before she came to church,
Wow.
And when she did start coming to church, she had so many questions. I don't know if she'll probably listen to this podcast because she knows it's me, but she'll listen to this interview. But, we did a 6-week Bible study with her that lasted 8 months. Every Wednesday almost. We would get like 2 sentences in and the questions. So, and that investment as you build and build and build and build, and then seeing someone, you know, actually starting to live for God and seeing the changes that happen in their life. I mean, that's what it's all about, that for me anyway. It's just
Mm,
seeing people get closer to God and people grow and people learn and ministries develop, and that's exciting for me.
yeah,
That's really what drives me when I see that, because that's what we do. That's why we do what we
yeah.
do.
That's
You
what
know.
it's all about.
Um, yeah, exactly.
Seeing lives change.
Mm.
Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation and getting to know you even more. You're a friend of mine, but I learned a few things here talking to you. And I like to finish off these conversations giving my guests the opportunity to share a word with the listeners, something that God
Hmm.
has laid on your heart. So, whatever you feel like God has given you for the listeners, I'd love it if you would share it and take your liberty,
Hmm.
bro.
Okay. You know, when you asked me to go on the podcast, of course, I knew this question was coming, so I started praying and thinking about it. And we look around at what's going on in the world right now, and there is, I think you said it earlier, it's so uncertain. You don't know when the borders are going to suddenly shut, and uncertainty is probably the key word right now. We just don't know what tomorrow holds. And yet the fact remains that God hasn't changed. He still needs people willing to serve him. He still needs people willing to labor in the field, even in this environment that we live in. And it's interesting, in Matthew 28:19, Jesus tells his disciples to go and make disciples of all nations. And the disciples, if you think about what the disciples had been through, they'd just seen Jesus crucified, then they'd seen him resurrected.
Mm,
Um, and he had told them that persecution was going to happen. Their lives had been completely changed in the 3 years of Jesus' ministry. I think it's fair to say that the disciples were facing a lot of uncertainty in that time as well. And it's interesting that Jesus uses the word go for me, because I think there's something implied in that. Every time Jesus had said go to someone, the power of God was there. Jesus said to the blind man, go and wash in the pool of Siloam, and he was healed. Go show yourself to the priest. You know, um, Over and over again through all of his miracles, he would tell them, go and do this, go and do that. He sent his disciples, go, And I think when the disciples heard those words, go, they understood that what Jesus was saying is, I want you to go out, but I'm going to be going with you.
mm,
My power will be with you. My authority will be with you, because just like it was when I was here, when I would perform my miracles, I would tell people to go, and there was a power and an authority behind that. And I think as we look around with uncertainty, people are tending to withdraw into themselves and go, well, I just want to try and survive this. I just want to try and get through these days. But God is still calling people to go. And he's not just saying go because we need glory or because we've got nothing better to do, but he actually has a work for people to do. And it requires us to step out in faith, but understand also that God will be with us. And the Bible says he will never leave us nor forsake us. That hasn't changed. He's still the same yesterday, today, and forever. And we can trust that when we step out and go, we can trust that God will be with us and his power will be with us as well. We can't hold back in this season that we live in. I look around and it can't be long till Jesus comes back. It just can't be. This so clear to me that any day now, God could come back, and that would be the end of time. We're running out of time. We've got people to reach. You look at what's going on in Afghanistan. You look at the earthquake at Haiti, and all this kind of stuff that's going on. It's just, we've got work to do. And so we need more people to say, okay, well, Jesus has told me go, I'm going to go. I'm going to make a difference. Even if it's just to one person, I'm going to find someone and I'm going to make a difference. I'm going to go teach a Bible study and understand that when we say these words, when we actually go, God's power is with us, because we're stepping into his will and doing what he wants us to do.
What a great conversation and a wonderful example of what God can do in us and through us if we step out by faith. If this blessed you, please share it with a friend and encourage them to follow the podcast. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and a number of other platforms. Just search the Hack a Podcast and you should find us. We're releasing content every week, so the best way to keep in touch is to subscribe where you listen to it or follow the podcast so it goes directly into your podcast feed. If you have time to rate and review the show where you listen to it, I would greatly appreciate that. Thank you again for your time today, and we look forward to seeing you next time on the Hack a Podcast.